Good evening and welcome back. We welcome Dr. Kathryn Hummel, Dr. Muzaffar Saleem Shaikh, Dr. Yamini Shah, and Dr. R Raj Rao. We will now begin the discussion. The attack on Salman Rushdie is an attack on creative freedom. Dr. Muzaffar Saleem Shaikh. Muzaffar Saleem has been a professor of English in Pune College Camp for 2 decades and in King Saud University, Riyadh for 1 decade. He has published multiple collections of his poems and short stories. In the lockdown period, he came out with a novel, Beloved Princess. Dr. Kathryn Hummel is an Australian writer, social scientist, and multimedia artist. Author of 6 books of poems, her latest is Lamentuel, 2019. Kathryn's work across genres has been published, performed, translated, and anthologized worldwide. Among other honors, she has received the Melbourne Lord Mayor's Dorothy Potter Award. Dr. Yamini Shah researches in the area of gender and sexuality studies and socio-economically marginalized communities, writers of South Asia and Canada, alongside her research on the Indian education system, aesthetics, culture, and arts management. Public discourse is very close to her heart and strives to work in this sphere through the academia and literary publishing sector. She ably co-curated the literature segment Kala Ghoda Arts Festival in 2019 and is on their co-team. She has presented her research papers at several national and international conferences and has many published papers to her credit. Yamini's poems have been published in various anthologies, magazines, and journals. R. Raj Rao is an Indian writer, poet, and teacher of literature who has been described as one of India's leading gay rights activists. His 2003 novel, The Boyfriend, is one of the first gay novels to come from India. Rao has been a recipient of the Nehru Centenary Fellowship, UK, International Writing Program Fellowship, USA, Quebec India Fellowship, Canada, and ICCR Rotating India Chair Fellowship, Germany. I would now request Dr. R. Raj Rao to lead us through this intriguing conversation.
Thank you, Renu. Now, this panel discussion becomes relevant on account of the assault on Salman Rushdie on 12th August this year at the Chautauqua Institute in New York. But a little bit, maybe in order, um, by way of background. So, in 1988, and that is a good, more than 30 years ago, that Salman Rushdie published his third or fourth novel called The Satanic Verses. And there was an outrage immediately after this novel appeared. India was one of the first countries actually to ban the novel because they thought it would lead to rioting and so on. Rajiv Gandhi was the prime minister then. But in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini went to the extent of issuing what he called a fatwa that 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 said that not only did the book have to be banned, but indeed that the author of this blasphemous work, blasphemous according to him, had to be killed. Now, very recently, there was an article by Professor Faisal Devji, who is the director of the Asian Studies Center at Oxford University. And he pointed out that actually what Ayatollah Khomeini issued was not a fatwa, but it was a hukum. And he makes this distinction. He says a fatwa is issued by a religious authority in response to a hypothetical question, and it possesses no legal force, whereas a hukum is a decree by a head of state, and it represents the intervention of a government. So hukum is more serious than a fatwa, and this is something that I came across thanks to my friend Adil Jasawala, who pointed it out to me. Because all along, the word fatwa has been used and not the word hukum. So that is, something that's worth noting. However, what is important and interesting is that around 10 years after the issue of this edict by Ayatollah Khomeini, President Mohammad Khatami. This was 1998. And he said that Iran had distanced itself from the fatwa, but he also said that it cannot be officially withdrawn because only the person who issues it can withdraw it, you know. So it stayed, and yet the understanding was that, they would not act on it, that at least Iran officially wouldn't act on it and would indeed distance itself from the fatwa or the hukum. Now, between those 10 years, between 1988 and 1998, there were two assaults and one murder. The assaults were of Ettore Capriolo, who was the Italian translator of Satanic Verses, and of William Nygaard, who was its Norwegian publisher. And the murder was of Hitoshi Igarashi, who was the Japanese translator of the Satanic Verses. The interesting thing is that among the literary community of the world, while most writers came to Salman Rushdie's defense at the time and said that, they vouched for free speech and so on, there were writers who took a contrarian standpoint. In England, there was Roald Dahl and John Berger, who said that their exact words were that Salman Rushdie, in publishing the Satanic Verses, was insensitive to clerical sensitivities. And in India, Nissim Ezekiel, whose biographer I happen to be, he was the head of the PEN, which is Poets, Essays, Novelists, the Indian chapter. And along with a couple of other writers, they issued a statement where they said that, they signed this petition saying that they supported the ban on the Satanic Verses because the argument again was that, free speech notwithstanding, nobody had the right to hurt people's religious feelings and so on. So this is interesting that even within the literary world, there were two points of view. Of course, the ones who spoke in support of the ban and all that were in the minority as compared to most writers from all over the world, who came to Salman Rushdie's defense and said that, after all, it was only a work of fiction. And if you have really read that section of Satanic Verses called Mayhound, it's a dream sequence, really, where these two characters, Gabriel Chamcha and Gabriel Farishta and Salahuddin Chamcha, are on a flight, and one of them is having a dream, and he dreams about Prophet Muhammad, on while, while he's on that flight, and he's sleeping and dreaming. But that didn't wash with, not just the fanatics, but I think, I was in England around that time, and I saw the mood there because Salman Rushdie was a British citizen. And I was in England for my postdoc, and I saw the mood. There were young Muslims who said, we would like to be the first person to kill Salman Rushdie and so on. So, you know, it was really, it was crazy. And no one knew what would happen, Um, Eventually, of course, it turned out that Rushdie was safe. But I think that if you read his memoir, Joseph Anton, it becomes clear that he wouldn't have been possibly, alive today had it not been for the efforts of the Scotland Yard, which really went into overdrive and afforded him this security cover for a whole decade, which sometimes got on his nerves because there were so many restrictions. I mean, he was separated from his family. His first wife left him. She was a writer herself, and she said that she couldn't live in, that kind of. It was almost like house arrest, and she couldn't live that way. So, all that happened. Now, like I said at the beginning, why are we talking about all this so many years later? And the reason is that on 12th August, nobody expected that this 24-year-old young man, who is Lebanese actually, a Lebanese immigrant, and his name is Hadi Matar. And, there was this talk at Chautauqua Institute in New York, and Rushdie was one of the speakers. It was a paid for event, and the topic actually was, writers in exile and stuff like that. And this young man suddenly gets up and goes and attacks the author. There were people there. The anchor was also attacked. There were people there who initially thought that it was only, some sort of theatrical, you know, something at the start of the program, which was a kind of theatrical event just to endorse the idea of writers living in exile. But as it turned out, it was not. It was not. It was not theater, but it was for real. And you know, Salman Rushdie was badly affected. I'm told that he most probably is going to lose his left eye if he's not already lost it, and we don't know whether he'll be back to writing again. Another interesting thing is that after the publication of Satanic Verses, Salman Rushdie himself, wrote two essays in which he sort of backtracked and apologized. These essays appear in his 1991 collection of essays, Imaginary Homelands. One is called In Good Faith, and the other is called Why I Have Embraced Islam. And I wrote an article in Frontline actually some months ago where I quoted, excerpts from these essays, where he actually um, says, for example, in the second essay, Why I Have Embraced Islam, he goes on to say that I am certainly not a good Muslim. I'm able to say now that I am Muslim. In fact, it is a source of happiness to say that I am now inside and part of the community whose values have always been closest to my heart. So, he did that. He did that because I think he was desperate. He was desperate to not make amends, but desperate to, because one of the things that people keep saying is that, well, he should have known what he was getting into. And that question was also asked to him, and people asked him whether he'd written the satanic verses on purpose. His answer was that, of course, I did it on purpose. The question is, what is the it that I did? What I did not do was conspire against Islam. And then another question was, would you have written the novel differently had you known what would happen? And the answer to that is that, truthfully, I don't know. Another question was, would he change any of the text now? And again, the answer is, I would not because it's too late. But the really disturbing thing there is that he decided not to, and he says this in the essay, that he would not press for more translations of the novel, and he would not press for a paperback edition of the novel. Now, later he regretted this. If you read Joseph Anton, he says that I can't read those essays without a sense of shame and embarrassment at being so cowardly, that I had to take back what I had said. And ironically, it was his sister Samin, who said that have you gone mad? I mean, don't you have guts, or have you lost your spine and stuff like that? So now he regrets writing those essays. He says that I can't even look at that book and those essays without a sense of shame and embarrassment. So this is more or less the background to, what we are discussing today. Um, Renu gave very detailed introductions of all of you and of me as well, but I just wanted to say that this is a very heavy duty panel, and I'm very glad that I was able to put it together. One of the reasons I call it heavy duty is not just because we are all PhDs and we have books to our credit and so on, but it's a very diverse panel, in terms of religion and nationality and gender and sexuality. All the four of us represent different things. So I really look forward, to this conversation that we're going to have. And what I've done is just to make it convenient, I just sort of in the morning scribbled out 6 or 7 questions, but you don't have to stick to those questions, and feel free to, to say what you want to say. My first question, and this is to Kathryn, what do you think of the satanic verses? Like I said, it doesn't. This question doesn't imply that you read the novel, but we all know what the novel is about. So, what do you think about it?
Well, Raj, I'm an 80s kid, and so I was a child when the Satanic Verses was published. And I
Yes,
didn't really have exposure to it until I was living in Bangladesh, incidentally, where I came across a blank covered copy of the novel, which had been left in my house. Um, and personally, as a reader, I don't much engage with the novel itself, although its themes of migration and conflict between East and West, I think probably are more relevant to my life now and my work as a scholar now, and even as a writer. And so, in that regard, as a scholar and a writer, I acknowledge, its very famous style, the blending of magical realism and satire and fantasy. But as a social scientist, I suppose what really does engage me is it's impossible to remove the book from the context or the socio-political context in which it was published,
right,
and of course how it was received by the world and readers afterwards.
right, sure. So, Saleem, would you like to take the same question? What do you basically think about satanic verses?
Yes, Raj. You see, I read Satanic Verses and especially part 2. So, when it comes to artistic qualities, I would say it's the masterpiece and it
Right,
mesmerizes you. It mesmerizes you. You go on with the wave of it. And
right,
further, I will say it corrupts you. So, instead of asking to behead somebody, I think young people, whether
right,
believers or not, should be allowed, should be stopped to take that novel in their hands. But once they take it, you know, the city of Jahalia, if you are well read in Islamic history, you get involved in that and you feel that you are not reading a book, but you are living with them. And perhaps
right.
this is the magic of magic realism or whatever you could call it. But
Yeah,
unfortunately, the content and
yeah,
the intent, these are not good. Such a talented writer, but
right,
as you have just now said, this is a novel specially designed to create controversy so that in a short span of time the author would
No,
get.
let me interrupt you. I didn't say that it's a novel that is written to create controversy, but there are people who there are people who even went to the extent of saying that the West paid Salman Rushdie a lot of money to write it because they couldn't say the things that he says. So, they wanted someone from within the Muslim community to speak on their behalf. But, that is that is what some people said. Um, So
Yeah,
go on. I'm sorry to
yeah.
interrupt you.
So, as the author himself has agreed to it, and I think age is very important. He was young at that time, and so to
Yeah,
get publicity in a short span of time, the author would get name, fame, and wealth, and still would claim about what we call freedom of speech and would get the
right.
support from the people. So, I think if this talent would have been used positively, Salman Rushdie would have done very well, and what he wanted in the form of wealth, he would have
Yeah,
not got less than that. But he has crossed the limits, I'm sorry to say, and he has written the things which nobody would, even neither the Muslims nor the Hindus. Even I say, if you are an atheist, you would not agree to it because it is the violation of human right in a way, because abusing your mother and father or abusing your uh,
yeah,
icons, this is not fit for such a writer who has been uh, bestowed with a talent, unique talent. This is what I have to say about this novel.
yeah. I like the way you're making this distinction between form and structure on the one hand, and content and interpretation. It reminds me of an essay by Elaine Showalter, where she makes this kind of distinction. She says masculinist criticism is concerned with form and structure. So you are sort of vindicating him as far as you use the word form, as far as the form of not just this work, but all his fiction, uses magical realism and so on. But when it comes to content, that is where you are, you don't agree to what he's written. So I find that interesting. Yamini, let me put the same question to you. What do you think of the satanic verses?
I would like to answer this question with respect to pluralism. And when we think of that in the defense of pluralism, and if we give it equal respect, it boils down to a certain kind of public right not to be offended or insulted. The kind of controversy that the book has led to. So, with satanic versus the comparative freedom of speech doctrine, which and if we want to understand it in the perspective of free speech and the law, there's this term which is heckler's veto, which allows for the freedom of artistic expression to be subordinated to what are subjective claims of offense or indignity. Now, what happens generally is that the pluralism, which is based on the premise that it is the individual communities who draw the lines around what is deemed tolerable and acceptable, and to exercise absolute authority to police those lines. And general consensus is such that there is always a judicial overreach in this. Now, if we see this book in three different towers, one is religion, from where it gets its most attack on, and the form, which is literature, and the way it gets judged in the end is from the executive bodies. So we have three things here at play here. And if we say that if religion is to be understood only on the basis of religious texts, then this is literature. And if literature is to be critiqued by literary critics, then again there is the executive which is giving this order. So, I'm just putting these three things into the discussion and how this will pan out. Let's hear.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting that you make this tripartite distinction between the three things. When it comes to literature, again, like Saleem said, you see form and structure as aspects of literature, but the problem is always with content, isn't it? And the judicial overreach that you talked about is not about form. I don't think that they would even be in a position to understand the kind of magical realism that Salman Rushdie uses. So it's only with content. All right. let's come, to the attack itself. Um, what would you say about Salman Rushdie being attacked by a young man who was born 10 years, a good 10 years after the Satanic Verses was written, and in all probability who never read it? Um, so, what does this say about, I don't know, I mean, about, the word radicalization and all that is being used, but is it that this sort of prejudice is I mean, it's passed down from one generation to another generation, because that's scary, isn't it? And it would mean then that this can never end. If someone who was born much after the whole controversy erupted, and by the time he was born, it had already died down. And so many years later, he still recollected it. Or was it that he was paid a lot of money to do this by someone else? I mean, so what do you have to say about that, Kathryn?
Well, I would say then Salman Rushdie wrote a very successful book in that regard, and not because he's been targeted because of it. But if you think about why art is created, it is to endure. It is to go through generations of different meaning. And of course, I'm really taking it out of the context of a discussion based on faith or religious beliefs. But I mean, the ramifications couldn't be predicted. And Rushdie, as you say himself, has been in two minds about his intent. And I don't think that we can just say, oh, it's an old grudge, because the power of art and the way it actually carries messages is enduring, and it's going to go through different permutations of meaning for different people, different generations, and different communities.
Yeah, but does that happen to all writers? I mean, people read books and then forget about them. And here, I mean, there's something that seems to have a very long lease of life. And,
Yes.
what happened this year in August? I mean, um, I think that this is worrisome, because it may mean that there will be more such attacks and assaults on the future. It may mean that till they actually manage to kill the man, they're not going to rest. So, Salim, can I ask you the same question?
Yes, Raj.
About someone who's, if it was people of our
Quite ignorant.
generation who, yeah, who was there, who were around when the novel was written, and you read it, and the whole issues surrounding it and all that is one thing. But somebody who's um, much younger, not even from a literature background or anything, and is an immigrant, a Lebanese immigrant. And it also sort of, it's like what Trump was saying, that it gives the Republicans the upper hand, because the whole thing was that let's not have too much immigration into America and so on. So, what do you think?
Raj, even if Hadi
Yeah,
Matar would not have, would have read the book, he had no right to attack, because the attack, why it has been declared by Ayatollah Khomeini on two things.
yeah,
First, blasphemy. Second, apostasy. If these are the two things, then this is to be decided by an Islamic court. And
right,
of course, Salman Rushdie was not in an Islamic country. So no Islamic country had the right to bring him to the court of Islamic law. And Islamic
right.
law was not applicable to him in Britain.
Yeah.
So,
This is
so
America, of course, where this happened.
yeah.
Where the
So
attack happened was New York.
yeah, New York. No, no. I mean, when he wrote it, I'm talking about that,
Yeah,
Raj.
yeah,
When
yeah,
he wrote it, and you say that there is blasphemy in it, and you say that there is apostasy in it,
Yeah.
not only me, all the understanding Muslims are of the view that they condemn the attack.
Yeah.
Not only this attack, all the attacks which were done. The Muslim clerics, I quote, one Dr. I'm forgetting his name, Khalid Zahir, Dr. Khalid Zahir. What he
Yeah.
says is that, what he says is that you cannot take law into your hands, even if he is in your country and if he is tried in the court of law according to the Islamic law. You have to give him time to explain why he did this,
Right.
to explain his own point of view. And after that, if it is proved, then only you can do it. Otherwise, it will be murder. And a murder, according to Quran, is like killing the whole human race. And
Right.
hence, the attack by Hadi is not in any way accepted, or nobody will support it. Almost everybody condemns it, whether he had read
Yeah.
it or he had not read it. There was no question of attacking him. I hope I made
Yeah.
my point.
Yeah. You know, of course you have, and actually, he didn't get much support even from the Islamic world. You know, when he did this, there were a few, um, you know, the few people who lauded him, but in general, I don't think that he was really backed by the Islamic world. So you're right there. Yamini, would you like to take the same question?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of your question in particular, I'm reminded of Terry Eagleton and what she says about fundamentalism, which is that it is essentially a mistaken theory of language. And why I say that when I use it is because that it assumes that every word of a text, whether sacred or secular, must be read as a statement of a literal truth or a proclamation of the unshakable beliefs of the author. It is deaf to irony, metaphor, satire, allegory,
Yeah,
provocation, ambiguity, and contrariness. And added to that is how a nation reacts to something like this, wherein after the attack, India took almost 2 weeks to call that incident horrific.
yeah,
And the third fact about what has happened is has been done by Rushdie in various works, and one of which happens in Languages of Truth, wherein subtly he puts in these explanations of how he is struggling with this, and he says that it is an age of oversimplification, and this kind of multi-dimensionality of our identities, which is national, ethnic, tribal, or religious. And what we should we and I quote that literature has never lost sight of what our quarrelsome world is trying to force us to forget. Literature rejoices in contradiction, and in our novels and poems we sing our human complexity, our ability to be this or that.
yeah.
So
You're
it's
right there. You know, so of course, I mean, this deafness that you talk about to literary technique, and I think we're all on the same page as far as this is concerned. That what do you foreground in a literary work? Form and not content, and that's how it should be. In his case, he also additionally tried to point out that it was a dream sequence. And I think that this is also the failure of education, you know, because one is confusing the narrator's point of view with the author's point of view. I think that one of the first lessons in literature is that, you know, the author may be looking at his narrator ironically and not agreeing with him, but actually, you know, disagreeing with him. But all this is, of course, it's like casting pearls before swine. Sorry to use an expression like that. And even in the case of Khomeini, they just read out very selective passages, to him from that chapter called Mahound. And this is when he came up with that hukum or fatwa. So obviously, it was not proper understanding of the novel as a literary genre and so on. Salman Rushdie even tried to say in his defense that he is an Islamic scholar and has studied Islam and so on, and he doesn't necessarily endorse the point of view of his character, which is actually happening in a dream and so on. But of course, none of that washed with his, uh, I would call them tormentors then, and nor does it wash with them now, as the events of 12th August show. So this is, of course, very unfortunate. And like I was saying, if someone can um, think of attacking Rushdie after so many years, um, I mean, what does it sort of augur for the future? Will there be more attacks? Will he be safe? Everybody, I think he himself thought that, when Iran said that they had distanced themselves from the fatwa and so on, I think he believed them. He moved from England to America and he lived with relative freedom. He went to public events and gave readings and so on. And I guess this was completely unexpected. It must have come as a shock, even to him. Now, there's another view. This was also expressed by Professor Faisal Devji. And Kathryn, I wrote that piece for Scroll asking um, people. Kathryn, you were one of them, and Saleem, I also asked you what you thought about this demand that was made soon after the attack. The first one to make it was Bernard Henry Levy, and then David Remnick, who's the editor of New Yorker. He also, I mean, they were pressing for the Nobel Prize for Salman Rushdie. And of course, eventually he didn't get it, but they felt that it was about time he got it. And that's why I wrote that piece for scroll.in. But, there's a view expressed by Faisal Devji where he says that Rushdie has now become a larger than life figure, and he's known more for his ordeal than for his literary career, right? So I think that knowledge of Rushdie ends with Midnight's Children, and all those books that he wrote between 1980 and 1990, Moore's Last Sigh, Ground Beneath Her Feet, Shame, and then Satanic Verses. But what about all the work that came after that? I go to Crossword in Aund where I live, and they have a huge half-price section. And I found a novel by Salman Rushdie called The Golden House in the half-price section, which I've not even seen too many reviews of it and all that. And now apparently there's another one, which Adil Jasawala mentioned, and we don't even see it anywhere. So this view that he's going to be known more for his ordeal than for his actual literary career. What do you have to say about this, Kathryn? And is it unfortunate if a writer gets to be known by controversy rather than by his contribution to literature?
Of course it is. I really think that I mean, as I wrote, you quoted me in the Scroll article saying that you
Yes.
have to divorce
Yes.
the artist from the context.
Yes.
But in Rushdie's
Yes.
case, I really think it's a combination of both. His like enduring, as I said, talent, and I guess his iconicity as well as a champion of free speech, however imperfect that was. Because I was reading, of course, today about the concept of creative freedom or freedom of expression, the definitions are very varied. But of course, like, you know, if we look at writers and journalists and artists around the world who have been jailed or attacked or killed for also exercising this right to creative freedom, we see that Rushdie is a high-profile case, despite his writing. So I don't think we can really divorce him from that. So, you know, I can say Salman Rushdie or perhaps even Pussy Riot, and people would know what I'm talking about. But if I list people like Wilder Alfredo Cordoba, a Colombian journalist, or writers from Bangladesh, Niloy Chatterjee, Anata Bijoy Das, Washikur Rahman Babu, and Abhijit Roy, who were all killed for what they wrote in 2015 alone. And of course,
Right.
many women currently in Iran who are detained, Yalda Moriari, Nilufar Hamedi, Mona Bazoui, just to name a few. These people are also writing and challenging, I guess, the status quo and really engaging in controversial work, but don't have that same profile, and no one is really
Yeah,
paying
sure, sure.
attention.
Sure. So they don't have the privileges in a way that Salman Rushdie had. I really want to come to this question of creative freedom and whether there should be limits to it. But before that, I just wanted to ask Saleem and then Yamini, this view that he's become larger than life and he's going to be known more for his ordeal than for his literary career. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, Raj, it is obvious, but there is a strong reason to that. After the publication of Satanic Verses,
Yeah,
it became such a big storm that for the writer to have peace of mind to again write something of that, I mean, I'm talking about artistic level. That level was difficult, and he was
right,
running from one place to another, hiding for his
right,
life. So
right.
naturally, he did not have that peace of mind to do that creative writing, that talent which he had. And of course, it is that reason that he just became famous for the controversy and whatever
Yeah,
he wrote. After that, as you said, people didn't think about it, and maybe even the
yeah.
quality of that declined.
And that is surely unfortunate because, as you yourself were saying, I mean, he forged a new style. I mean, with there, after Midnight Children, there are so many people who started writing in that vein and using magical realism. It was not just magical realism, he was also experimenting with structure, story within story, going back to more Eastern ways of narration rather than Western linear narration. Actually, he owes his tribute to a very a little known novelist from India by the name of G.V. Desani, who wrote this novel all about H. Hatter, where he uses this story within story kind of structure. And of course, Raja Rao also did it in Kantapura. So those things are going to be lost, which is unfortunate. I don't know whether even researchers would take that up or, so this phrase, to know the dancer from the dance comes to mind. And um, that is indeed, what it seems to be. And is, of course, unfortunate. Yamini, would you like to give us your views on this?
So for Rushdie,
Because just a minute, Yamini. It's here it's controversy, but if you take marginal writing, Dalit writing, so you only look at it from the from the angle of caste, or women's writing from the lens of gender, or LGBT writing from the lens of sexuality. That happens to all of us. But the formal experimentation. So, form is something that you only think about when you're talking about mainstream writing. But when it comes to any kind of marginal writing, and actually post colonial or Commonwealth writing is also a form of marginal literature. then it becomes the issues. And I think that, again, it's a failure of the English departments. What are we doing as an English professor for 40 years and more? I would take the blame, that we're not training our students to read a text as they should. Yamini.
In our while I was studying in my student days, even we used to think as students of MA, that the best thing for an author to happen is that their book gets banned, and the person or the author poet gets absolute popularity. Your books are sold on streets, in every street, every corner of the world. So, I mean, we knew this was coming for Rushdie because of the way he negotiated with the notions of home and faith, and showing how our lives and stories flowed into each other, and we're no longer our own individual discrete selves. So he did that with the Enchantress of Florence, where he blends Fatehpur Sikri with the Italian Renaissance. He did that with Greek mythology. Then in Quichotte, he takes the American road trip. And I mean, there have been very few able to do it this way, but of course, this has landed him in hot, oily water. And it is something which is difficult to come out of. But I think I'd say that he has, I mean, somehow it has all woven itself into what it is now.
Right. We are nearing the end of this very important conversation, I would say. There is a general question, of course, that I want to ask you guys, and which is, Kathryn, you were trying to touch upon this. Should there be
Yes.
limits to freedom of creative expression, or is it, an absolute right? Kathryn.
Yes. Thanks,
And
Raj.
Kathryn, just a
Yes.
minute, Kathryn. I'm asking you this as you're a Westerner, because I
Yes.
think that as you move from the West to the so-called Orient, the views on this change a little bit. So tell us, what do you think?
Okay. Well, it's probably revealed in my answer, because I was thinking, of course, about well, firstly, I think what we mean by creative freedom, which could be a panel discussion in itself. But I mean, how do we frame it? I think conceptually we assume that freedom has no limits, and that's of course an ideal. But what limits freedom is civilization in different parts of the world. I mean, as we know it, these political and social structures that have been influenced by different cultures and, of course, religions, if we're talking about this. And I came across UNESCO's definition of, the right to creative freedom, and UNESCO writes, this is a quote, it's defined as freedom to imagine, create, and distribute diverse cultural expressions, free of government censorship, political interference, or the pressures of non-state actors. It includes the right of all citizens to have access to these works and is essential for the well-being of societies. And I think in Rushdie's case, this is very interesting, that the last phrase, well-being of societies, because I think a lot of the backlash against satanic verses was because it was detrimental to society, it didn't create this kind of well-being. But going back to the idea that the idea of the people reading the book, or people not even reading the book but hearing about the book and deciding to interpret it as per their own beliefs. I mean, it just goes to show that art doesn't exist in a vacuum, nor is it an elitist pursuit. Like, we can't say that people who disagree with a more literary or highbrow or so-called educated point, like opinion of this book, are necessarily wrong. I think that freedom of expression can't exist without freedom of interpretation, and we can't defend one without defending the other two, no matter how much we condemn the actions of that spring from an interpretation. I don't think we can say that people definitively misunderstand something if we are trying to say that Rushdie, in writing this book, was defending a right to creative freedom, we would also conversely have to defend
Right.
that freedom of interpretation.
Right. Saleem, what do you think about this? Should there
Would you
be
would you please
limits?
repeat your question, Raj?
Yeah, the question is that should there be limits to freedom of creative expression?
Yeah.
I'm saying creative expression, which is slightly
Yes.
different from expression in general, because when you
Yes,
say
Raj.
creative expression, it is through an art form.
Raj, now again, it comes with east or west. What are the norms? What do people think about it? When it comes to waste, of course, they say that unrestrained freedom the author should enjoy. But when it comes to East, we are of the view that there should be some self-restraint upon the author, not from the government, not from any religious authority, but he is bound for the ethics and he has to think of it. That's what he is writing. So coming to Salman Rushdie's satanic verses again, as this much all of us know that the city of Jahaliya, in that the brothel and the staff, and then the same names of the prophet's wives, whom we consider to be our holy mothers. Now, what will be the repercussion? I mean,
Yeah.
whatever religion you belong to, or maybe you are an atheist, but there is an ethics of writing, and that should be from within, and the author should think about that. Let's not call it to be a restriction, but a self-restraint of thinking what
Okay.
he is writing.
Okay. Yamini?
There's one something that I'd like to put to test for the first time. You know about it, Raj, but I want to put it out to people today that there's something that I've been working on, which is the theory of abstract oralism and how it's all about speaking to power and how one does it in an abstract manner. I think it is one strategy we could use if we have to exercise this kind of freedom of expression, and if one really has to and doesn't have the means to bear the wherewithal, you could make it a cryptic and you have said what you have to, but of course it come with the entire package. And I'd like to end this with Osip Mandelstam's words saying that you took
Yeah.
away all the oceans and all the room. You gave me my shoe size with bars around it. Where did it get you? Nowhere. You left me my lips and they shaped my words, even in silence. This was when he was taken to the Gulag during the Stalinist purges, and it speaks so much about such freedom of expression, creative expression in particular.
Okay. Last question. We're running out of time. Do you think he should? He didn't get the Nobel Prize this year, but there are people who think he should get it sooner rather than later. So, what do you think, Kathryn?
I think I would like to see, hopefully, a new piece of writing from Mr. Rushdie, and assess it based on his contribution after the attack as well, not just
Right.
for his
Not
current
just
body
because
of
of the
work.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I fervently hope that he is able to keep producing work because he is as I say, an icon and a treasure to the literary world, however controversial. If possible, that would be marvelous to see new work from him after this ordeal.
Right. Saleem?
Raj, I have already talked to you about it.
Yes. Yes.
That when it comes to it, in my view, one has to ask the question: is Salman Rushdie noble enough to get the Nobel Prize? And
Right.
my answer is, of course, not.
Okay. Yamini.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Nobel Prize is not based on nobility, it's based on literary merit. And based on that, of course, when it
I'm
comes,
not, Yamini, sorry to interrupt, but I'm not sure of that because there have been a number of great writers whom the Nobel Prize has eluded, including James Joyce and, a whole lot of others, Marcel Proust and so on. So,
that's what it has set out to be. I mean, of course, it is something which is governed by people who live, who are breathing flesh and life, and it would be dependent on the jurors year after year. But yes, of course, it should. I don't think it should be a discussion that he should get an award just after this or because of this. It should
yeah.
purely be based on the merit of his literary capabilities.
Yeah, because if he gets it now, this point that Faisal Devji makes, that he's become larger than life and he's known more for his ordeal than for his literary career. I mean, that's how people are going to see it, even if that's not the case, but that's how they're going to see it, unfortunately.
To be
Um,
interpreted.
we've run out of time, so I think let me hand it over to Renu. Is she around? Or Lena? Is there anything else that anyone wants to say? Kathryn, Saleem, Yamini, any closing comments?
Nothing from me.
Okay. Renu, we are done. So it's
Great.
over to you.
That was a refreshing session with tons of wisdom. We all enjoyed it. Thank you, Dr. Kathryn Hummel, Dr. Muzaffar Salim Sheikh, Dr. Yamini Shah, and Dr. R Raj Rao for being our PILF guests. Our next conversation, The Obsession with Cricket, begins in 15 minutes with Boria Mazumdar, Ratnakar Shetty, and Devendra Prabhudesai. See you soon.